I think Trump is right on this. I think a lot of people in his administration, you don't like to talk about the Fed, but sometimes you kind of have to. And I always thought a tip-off here was a sort of moderate type guy, really what I would call a sort of Wall Street consensus economist named Mohammed El-Arian, who's a nice chap. He's not a Trump supporter. He's not a supply sider. He's not part of what I would call our group. But he came on the show about a month ago or something like that, 5-6 weeks ago. And he called for Jay Powell's resignation. And he said, with good logic, he said basically, look, Powell's had such a zigzag approach at the Fed that the longer he stays, the worse the independence argument gets and the worse the Fed's credibility gets.
How do you mean? Because...
Well, I think in this case, there's sort of two sides to it. One was the policy side where, Joe Biden comes into office and spends like crazy. Yeah. And the Fed is shoving money into the economy to accommodate the Fed. Okay,
and so the inflation's just transitory.
Right. And then they said inflation was transitory. First they said there was no inflation. Then they said it was transitory. And then, so having pushed all this money into the economy to finance the government spending and create what became a 9% inflation peak, ultimately a 20% cumulative inflation. Wow. Then all of a sudden, they step on the brakes. It's like a cartoon. And they step on the brakes in the middle of 2022, having done everything wrong in 21 and said everything wrong. I remember Janet Yellen saying the same thing. And then she went on CNN and you could see, she said, well, I guess there is inflation. I called it the hostage interview. She looked like one of the hostages in the Middle East, at gunpoint, she's saying it's inflation. Well, that was kind of Jay Powell too. So anyway, then they put on the brakes and they jam up interest rates by 500 basis points, 5 full percentage points. So that was dumb. And then right before the election, all of a sudden, out of the blue, he knocks down interest rates by 50 basis points. They called the jumbo rate cut in September. Historically, look, I started my career at the New York Fed, all right, in 1973. So this is a long time. I've, been in the Fed. When I worked for Reagan, I was engaged in some Fed stuff. I've watched the Fed for all these years. And then I had lunch with Jay Powell once every couple of weeks for 3 years when I was working for Trump. So I know a little bit about this story. You don't get in the political season, you don't make big changes in monetary policy. It's just not done. Why did he do it? Well, I don't know why. You have to ask him because he won't say. Right? He sort of dodges the question and says it's not political. The economy was not falling apart. I'm sorry. And the inflation rate, by the by, was at least a point or more over their target. So he does that. And, again, from pillar to post to pillar to post. And then the other thing you mentioned culturally.
The woke stuff.
Right, the woke stuff.
Lael Brainard was giving speeches about the Fed getting involved in climate change policy.
Well, he joined this consortium of central banks, which global consortium of central banks, which was essentially based on climate change. But also, maybe worse than that, the bank supervision, right? The Fed supervises banks, and they have bank examiners and so forth. They're not the only agency, but they're a principal agency. And they were basically telling banks to make loans based on some definition of climate change, whatever that meant, and don't make loans for fossil fuels. That was the key. Everybody started hearing talk and anecdotes from bankers that the Fed supervisors were saying, stop making loans for oil and gas pipelines or drilling or fracking or any of those things. And then there was also, the Fed set up a lot of DEI offices. I can't verify the board in Washington. I think so. But I know they pushed the regional reserve banks, many of which had set up these DEI offices. So yeah, he was pretty woke about it. And this stuff gets out.
Yeah.
The public understands.
Was he just weak, or do you think he's gone woke himself?
Oh, I think he swung with the political wind is what I did. You know, I mean, I know Jay. Let's see, Jay was worked in the fiscal area of the Treasury Department under Papa Bush. He's not a crazy person, he just became very political and then denied it and made a lot of bad decisions. Look, it wasn't the best. It wasn't the best appointment. It was, you know, Trump really never forgave his Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, who I might add was a very loyal and good Treasury Secretary. But on that point, Trump never forgave him. And
what about?
There were some pretty bad stories about that.
Oh, were there?
But I mean, again, I don't know. Mnuchin's a pal of mine, but the fact is, there were some Oval Office meetings where the president just raised his voice in the Treasury Secretary, and then said, he said at one point he said you're not me. He says you're in charge of the Fed. He says to me, he said I'm in the NEC. You're in charge of the Fed, all these Fed appointments, which I did. But of course, backdoor, I passed them so that Mnuchin could comment on it because the NEC and the Treasury should always work together.
But why did Trump get angry with Mnuchin? Was it over Powell or everything else?
Well, no, it was over Powell.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, because
from the beginning,
the first term, Powell started raising interest rates not long after Trump's tax cut bill. And there was no inflation, and no one could figure that out. I mean, it was dumb. I mean, it held the economy was growing.
Yeah,
we had it growing by at one point, you know, national GDP by 4% or better. It was really something.
It was doing so well until COVID.
Well, yeah, but even before that, there was a slowdown because the Fed started raising interest rates. And I never understood that myself. And then they finally stopped raising them and actually began to draw them back down again. So Trump was furious at Powell in the first term,
right,
for jacking up rates for no particular reason. Anyway, it's sort of a sad tale. If it weren't such serious business, it reads comedically to some extent.
Yeah,
people yelling at each other and oh my God. But no, look. Here's the bottom line is President Trump's going to take the Fed over, as he should. Yeah. I mean, I'm for Fed independence, but I don't think they're from another planet.
Yeah,
and I think a president who has an economic policy, particularly one as clearly defined as Trump does, should have the opportunity to implement his policy. And whether you're an activist judge, okay, or the chairman of the Federal Reserve, or the chairman or a member of the Federal Trade Commission, you shouldn't block the president. He is the chief executive and the commander-in-chief. He is elected by the people. You are exactly right.
Popular vote.
This is why the weaponization falls apart. This is why the lawfare should fall apart. The ultimate jury was November of 2024 when, as you say, he won the popular vote. He won all the swing states.
Yeah.
It's the biggest victory in quite some time. He should have a chance to put his platform into place. That's what people want. So nobody should be no one other unelected person should stand in the way.
And when you say Donald Trump should take over the Fed, you mean that ultimately he will have 4 of the 7 governors. He'll have a majority of people who are he's appointed.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I mean, the way you look at it. Well, so he'll replace Powell next May. All right. That's in the cards.
Yeah. Who with? Who would you if you could wave a magic wand, who's the best person?
I felt the 2 Kevins were the best, Kevin Hassett and Kevin Warsh.
Right.
They're both very dear friends of mine.
Kevin Warsh is a young guy, isn't he? And very ambitious.
He's a younger guy, yeah.
Right. Well, he's got black hair.
A lot of experience. He was a Fed governor for, I think, a half a dozen years. He worked in the Treasury. He also worked at the NEC as a staff position. But they're both very smart fellows. They're both personal friends of mine. I don't make a choice between the 2, but I've told the president and Scott Bessent and others that I think it should come from one of the 2 Kevins. They'll both do a very good job. Besant just made a speech and an op-ed piece, rather, over the weekend. And you need a top-to-bottom review of the Fed. Everything: monetary policy, regulatory policy, personnel policy, staffing policy, economic models policy. There has to be a thoroughgoing, and you need somebody from the outside, and then bring in new people. So look so Steve Myron's going to take a temporary job at the Fed.
Yeah.
And take a leave of absence from the Council of Economic Advisors. But that seat will be appointed by Mr. Trump. Then let's see.
Lisa Cook.
And then Lisa Cook, I mean, she doesn't understand it, but she's been fired.
Yes.
All right. She has been fired.
Yeah.
The meeting.
Who's paying her salary?
Well, it's all interesting question here. First of all, she's been fired for these allegations. You don't have to go, the court doesn't have to prove her guilty or not, by the way. If the president fires you, you're fired.
Yeah.
Okay. President appoints, this is this odd thing. The president appoints Federal Reserve governors. He appoints them with the confirmation of the Senate. Therefore, he should be able to fire them.
100%.
I mean, I've always believed that.
Joe Biden appointed Lisa Cook, one of his DEI hires.
He sure did.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it was a DEI hire.
All of his appointments were DEI hires.
You know, people have her dead to rights on the mortgage fraud. But even putting that aside, she must not appear. I mean, she should not be permitted to go into the building. She has been fired by the president. The FOMC meets the 16th and the 17th, if I'm not mistaken. And she must not be able to sit in those meetings. She must not be able to vote in those meetings. She has been fired. Now, the issue is something called cause. All right, you can only fire Fed people for cause. The trouble is the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 never defined the word cause. All right, what does cause mean?
Whatever the president says.
Well, I think that's correct, that cause should be whatever the chief executive says it is.
But Abby Lowell, Hunter Biden's lawyer, who's representing Lisa Cook, doesn't think that's the case.
Well, I would want it. I mean, he didn't do that well with Hunter.
No.
I don't know that I'd want him as my lawyer. I thought that was sort of a lousy.
But it's strange he's representing Letitia James and Adam Schiff, who are both in trouble for mortgage fraud.
Yeah. Well, that's up to them.
What does that tell you? Yeah.
Well, it tells me, by the way, they're all in cahoots.
Yeah.
You know, talk about the Fed independence or the lack thereof. They all said the same thing, by the way. They won't be bullied. They all had the same talking point.
Right.
So I found very interesting.
Interesting.
Letitia James is the New York State Attorney General. Lisa Cook, who was teaching school in Michigan, I think, and is a Fed board member. And then pencil neck Adam Schiff. They all had the same phrase, "We will not be bullied." And as you point out, the same lawyer. I find that to be very interesting.
Yes.
Okay. And it tells me that the Democrats, you know, they're still trying to practice some kind of united anti-Trump, I don't know what's the right word, lawfare in reverse or something. But anyway, he's going to win this battle. Trump will win this battle on the Fed.
Tariffs. You were against tariffs. I think that was the majority position among economists and Wall Street people. But Donald Trump loves tariffs.
Loves it.
So, you know, I mean, he sees them as very useful in a number of ways, whether it's bending other countries to his will or paying down the debt eventually. What do you think? I mean, I know you were against tariffs previously. Do you think he's right?
I've been a supporter of his tariff policy, both in the first term and now.
But then was China, wasn't it, as a weapon against China?
Yes, that's right.
But this is more broad-ranging.
Yes. Well, I made the case. I will make the case to you, however incredulous you may become, that Donald Trump is a free trader. He is, and I have had long, soulful talks with him about this point that started 10 years ago. And I wrote a couple of op-ed pieces in the first term, which he signed off on before the G7 and the G20. in the Post, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, making that case that fundamentally his vision, he's an internationalist, first of all. Always did business around the world. This isolationist stuff, just completely wrong, as we've seen. But on trade, fundamentally, he would like a world of zero tariffs or equally low tariffs, ending non-tariff barriers, and various government subsidies.
Sneaky tariffs.
Okay. That's the world that he wants. And that is, I still believe, one of the guiding lights for his entire trade policy. And sometimes, I mean, look, we don't live in a world of free trade. We have not lived in such a world probably since the few years following World War II.
Oh, really?
Yes. If you go back and look, the United States, everybody was helping the Allies recover in Europe and Japan and so forth. But that didn't last long. And the world trading system has been broken for decades and decades.
You mean because of non-tariff barriers?
That's correct. Both tariffs and non. I mean, look, these...
And China getting into the world trade and being supposedly a third world country.
Right. Allowing China normalization and admission to the World Trade Organization. And the guy who had a big influence on me is Bob Lighthizer, because he really showed me when I came in to run the National Economic Council in the first term. Lighthizer and I were two Reagan kids. That's when we first met. But he really showed me the differentials. What India was charging in tariffs, and what China was charging in tariffs, and what the EU was charging in tariffs. So I had a sort of mainstream free trade view, but I didn't know much about trade. The differentials were enormous.
So America was getting ripped off.
America was getting ripped off.
Yeah.
And I want to just back up to make this point. One of the great things Trump did in his first term, certainly the tax cut bill, which was terrific, but he rang the bell on the China threat.
Yes.
He rang that bell.
Before COVID.
And he rang it over and over again. Now, he had said it as a private citizen, but as president, it obviously carried much more weight. And the China trade threat, and of course, the negative impact on the American economy and the deindustrialization in the heartland, and also in general, the national security threat. We had this naive view about China that if only we were nice to them, they would be great to us and be some kind of ally. Or an economic view was if we could persuade them with low tariffs to adopt a capitalist economy. Yeah. And they actually did for a period of while, the Deng Xiaoping reforms, but those were long over by the time Xi Jinping comes in. And Xi Jinping is himself very dictatorial. We still have the best advanced technology in the world, by far. But we must never lose that. Those are, I call them the family jewels. We had to protect the family jewels. Very important. Now,
you mean from IP, stealing IP?
Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself. Yes. And what did China, the biggest rap against China was the intellectual property theft. Or what I learned on the China trade team was that American businesses operating in China, almost all of them had Chinese boards.
Right.
They had a majority of directors. That is correct.
Yeah.
And those boards generated the forced transfer of technology, where literally you had to come in and put your plans down on the table.
Right.
And these Chinese are sitting there writing this stuff up.
Yeah.
Well, that has to stop.